This is telling about how these soldiers would just mutilate and torture little babies. I pick them up, throw them against trees. This represents the men going around afterwards, after there was a massacre or something, and looking for the dead bodies to cover them up, to bury them.
This is the story of one woman's resolve to make a difference in the world. This is the story of how one person's perseverance and selfless dedication is changing the lives of thousands of Mayan Indians in Guatemala. This is the story of how one person can have a very profound and positive impact on a culture that has faced hardship and repression for hundreds of years. This is the story of Romy Gonzales. Guatemala in Central America, with a population of 14 million, has a significant indigenous population. About 43% of people in Guatemala are of pure Mayan ancestry, with the remaining population mostly Ladino or mixed Spanish Mayan. The Mayans cling tenaciously to their traditions, which makes Guatemala one of the most colorful and interesting places in Latin America. However, the history of the Mayan peoples here is one of long suffering. Since Pedro de Alvarado defeated the Mayans in this region in 1524, the Mayans have been systematically enslaved, killed, or at best excluded from Guatemalan society. Despite being one of the richest countries in Central America, only a small minority benefit from the abundant natural resources of the region. This has left the Mayan Indians in an endless cycle of poverty and political disenfranchisement. Romy Gonzales was born in 1941 in Monterey, California. Her parents divorced at age 6, and her alcoholic mother was unable to care for the children, so Romy was made a ward of the court and bounced around various foster homes. By age 18, she was on her own, but went on to marry, have 2 children, and a successful career at Pacific Bell. She received an early retirement package at age 46, and with a failed marriage behind her, she decided to leave the United States and retire to Guatemala. She arrived in Guatemala in 1988 at the tail end of a 36-year civil war that saw entire Mayan villages massacred by the Guatemalan military. It is estimated that 100,000 Mayan Indians were killed or disappeared during the civil war that finally ended with the signing of a peace accord in 1996. Those who were not killed went into hiding in the remote mountainous regions of the north, and 100,000 fled into Mexico.
Todos los días se escuchaba disparos. Y durante ese tiempo puse a buscar a mi esposo. Y buscamos a él en el lugar con mi papá cuando llegaron, pero solo 2 días de ahí nos venimos porque no conocemos el lugar donde meternos. Nos venimos y de ahí fui a buscar a mi esposo en todos los hospitales donde habían muertos. Bendito mi traje, que como cuando nos casamos nos mandan mucha ropa. Bendito toda mi ropa para ir a buscarla. Y ya no reconocí a él con todos los muertos que vi. En Sololá, en Chimaltenango, en el Quiché. Yo vi todos los morgues, pero nunca apareció.
Golpeó mucho a la población. Además de golpearlo, se quedaron niños huérfanos, madres que quedaron con sus hijos o se murieron sus esposos. Entonces deja mucho, esto también ha afectado en la vida, ha afectado a los jóvenes, ha afectado a la vida en general y a nivel nacional, no hablando de Joyabaj ni de la comunidad. Si uno fue violado, uno fue golpeado, lo sacaron en la casa, quemaron las casas, les robaron sus animales, llevaron todo, se quedaron sin nada. ¿Cómo la persona no siente esto? ¿Cómo la persona le va a olvidar a esto? Creo que nunca y jamás.
Fue duro la guerra que pasó y creo que sí afectó bastante a mi familia. Incluso llegaban allá y incluso una aldea de por allá cerca de nosotros exterminado, ni un sobreviviente allá. Y prácticamente esa aldea ahora nadie lo habita.
Aquí masacraron mucha gente. Masacraron más de 100 personas, más de 113 personas que tenemos en nuestro conocimiento. Quizás hay más, ¿ya? La mayoría de la gente fueron matados por el ejército, algunos también por la guerrilla, pero la mayoría fue por el ejército. Ellos vinieron, quemaban las casas, encerraban a la gente dentro de las casas y los quemaban. y mataban, los ahorcaban, los colgaban y hacían un montón de cosas con la gente. Ya cuando regresamos teníamos nosotros mucho miedo.
Me quemaron aquí de la barriga con tizones de fuego. Aquí está la cicatriz, ¿verdad? Mire, aquí le muestro. No soy mentira, mire. Todo esto es una cicatriz de fuego. Y todo aquí es desde los testículos. Y me quebraron 3 costillas también. Por eso no solo yo sufrí ese sufrimiento, que mucha gente aquí en nuestro pueblo, el área de Chile más que todo. Y toda la comunidad también sufrieron muchos.
It is the survivors of these massacres that are now part of Romy's life. She has brought hope to these people through providing educational opportunities.
What prompted me to get involved with the Mayans? I had become acquainted with some people that used to go up to Santa Cruz del Quiché, which is the capital of the department of El Quiché. And we'd go up there and visit with some of the nuns, the Dominican nuns up there. One of the particular nuns had started up a scholarship program because a lot of the foreigners would go up there, and she knew they had money to donate. She started the program, and then about a year or so later, she had to go back to Ireland to take care of her parents, so I took over the program. And it was all indigenous people in the program. The biggest tragedy in my life has been the loss of my 2 sons. And that happened while I was down here. There was nothing that could have prevented it. One of my sons actually had a drug overdose, and he was 24 years old, and I wasn't aware that he was that much into drugs. And then my other son, 3 years later, in the same month, I got a call from the American Embassy, and I knew it was my other son. He was 35 years old, and him and his wife got in an accident and flew off a mountainside into a lake. And with those tragedies, I put myself more into helping out of people, because if I was just going to sit there and feel sorry for myself, it's not going to do anybody any good. And I had just more or less gotten started with the student program. And I think I can have a little bit more empathy for the people, because I have had a loss like they have during the war, not as tragic. And I do know what happened to my sons. Unfortunately, a lot of the people never did see them, and they don't know what happened to them. And that's actually more tragic than what happened to me.
In 1997, Romy set up Foundations for Education, a non-profit charitable organization that provides scholarships to Mayan children from primary school through secondary and beyond. One area of Guatemala that was particularly hard hit by the military's aggression was the department of Quiché, where many of Romy's projects have been set up. At the height of the war in the early 1980s, the military carried out what is known as a scorched earth campaign, where entire villages were destroyed and women and children were brutally tortured and killed. It is estimated that over 400 Mayan villages were razed. 2 presidents are responsible for ordering most of these atrocities: General Fernando Romeo Lucas Garcia, followed by General Jose Efrain Rios Montt. The 14 months of Rios Montt's rule were the bloodiest in Guatemala's history since the Spanish conquest 400 years earlier. During his rule, it is estimated that 70,000 civilians disappeared, and as many as 1.5 million were displaced. Ironically, Rios Montt called himself an evangelical Christian. Rios Montt's policies were also strongly supported by the administration of Ronald Reagan. In fact, Reagan was quoted as saying, "Rios Montt is a man of great personal integrity who is getting a bum rap on human rights." Shortly after Romy arrived in Guatemala, she saw the need to help Mayan people, and in particular the need to help educate the Mayan youth. Throughout the history of Guatemala, there has been little emphasis on educating the Mayan. Although education is now theoretically free and compulsory for ages 7 to 14, the reality is very different. Many communities lack educational facilities altogether, and many parents require their children to work to support the family. Only 50% of children reach grade 5, according to a UN study in 2002, and Guatemala spends less per capita than any other country in Latin America on education. Only 23% of children aged 13 to 18 attend secondary school. Many Mayan children are also required to do seasonal work on fincas or plantations with their parents, and this work coincides with the school year. Furthermore, only a limited amount of school teaching is done in Mayan languages, adding another barrier to education for young Mayans. Romy's Foundations for Education has attempted to overcome some of these obstacles to education.
In 2004, I had approximately 150 students. The majority of the students are actually in the high school level. They're in grades 10 through 12. All of my students, and I've had approximately 65 graduate since I was legalized in 1997, and they all have jobs and are all working.
Many of Romy's former students are survivors of the massacres of the 1980s. With her efforts, they have gone on to become leaders in their communities.
Miguel came to me through a teacher in Hoyaba, and he's now in his third year of university in education bilingual.
Ahora yo estoy apoyando a capacitar maestros, ¿verdad?, sobre el nuevo currículum de nacional que está preparando Guatemala, y eso esperamos que nos vaya a ir muy bien. Y como estaba diciendo a compañeros, que este es un proceso. El objetivo, la competencia se logra a los 25 años, porque eso apenas está dando un inicio, apenas está cambiando. No, esto no se hace ni de la noche a la mañana. Tenemos que estar conscientes que este es un inicio, pero tenemos, para que dar un inicio tenemos de cambiarnos nosotros mismos, porque si no estamos cambiados, no podemos cambiar a los demás.
Another one of Romy's sponsors is Dina Evangelina Sape Diaz, a 23-year-old Mayan from Tecpan.
Trabajar con los niños es lo más lindo que se puede haber y sí me gusta. Y por eso mismo yo sigo estudiando esta carrera para ya trabajar con el nivel básico, ya con jóvenes, para ejercer mi profesión aún ahí con ellos.
Dina has been such a success with her education that I want to make sure that the father is always in agreement that she can continue her studies. For instance, there was a slight crisis last year, and the father did not want her to continue her university studies because with all the running around she was doing with the investigation involved with the studies, she wasn't sick, but she was getting to be very thin, and he's concerned about his girl's health. So what I did at that point is I offered, well, because she was running into the city of Tecpan and using the computer to turn in her work for the university, I offered the father that if I could talk with the sponsor and if the sponsor was agreeable to buying a computer for Dina, would he feel better about her continuing her studies? And he said yes.
In Neiba, we met up with Magdalena Cedillo Cobo. She was rendered a widow by the war. She was left with twin sons to raise on her own. Because of Romy, she was herself able to study nursing at university, and her twin boys were put through high school on Foundations for Education scholarships and have now gone on to study medicine in Cuba.
Cuando andaba en busca de oportunidades para que mis hijos pudieran seguir, gracias a Romy pues me dio la mano y estoy muy emocionante, estoy muy feliz con ella, porque si no hubiera sido por ella pues los patojos no fueran universitarios como están ahorita y les va muy bien en Cuba. Pues ahorita estoy trabajando por ellos.
My program is different in that it's not just handing over money for the kids to study. Their requirement is that during their vacation time, during October and December, that they have to do community projects in their villages. For instance, I have had students that will go to the local primary school, talk to the directors, and get a group of kids and reinforce the kids in Spanish or whatever subjects they're having problems with. I have a group of students from the Huehuetenango area, and they're recording old stories from that area. In the Chahul area, I have over 30 little legends of that area, of which my students interviewed old people. They recorded them down. They wrote them in their native language of Ixil and also in Spanish. So it's a program that works with the communities and the students to accomplish the main goal, and that's the students, when they graduate, to be working with the communities.
In addition to providing scholarships through Foundations for Education, Romy has been able to raise money for the construction of a school in the village of Xish. This school has evolved from a 3-room facility into a relatively large complex with multiple classrooms, a dormitory, and a library. Romy was able to raise funds for the original building through a group of Canadian dentists.
Kindness in Action, a dental group from Alberta, Canada, actually gave us all the funds to do 3 classrooms and an office, which was completed a year ago. We just are almost finished with this 2-story building. At the bottom will be a dormitory that will serve for 40 students, 20 girls, 20 boys, that'll come down from the mountains, and it'll be a boarding school. They'll stay there. Above will be the library for the students. That should be finished in a couple of weeks. Then after that, we're going to start construction of another 2-story building that will be a little bit smaller, and that'll be the kitchen dining area, and above could service more classrooms. And that'll be there so that they'll have a nice view of everything here.
These dentists had been providing volunteer dental services in the communities around Quiché, and the founder of Kindness in Action, Dr. Emil Shopka, agreed to get the dentists involved in funding Romy's first school. Romy has made Jose Ixtep Ixtoyac the director of the school in Xish. They met when Romy brought the Canadian dentist up to Xish in 2001, and he told Romy about the need for a school in the community. The plan was instantly hatched to raise funds for a new school, and a year later, when the dentist returned, the school was built.
Durante el conflicto armado, o la guerra que pasamos aquí en Guatemala, yo tenía 8 años. Yo estaba estudiando en la escuela, apenas primer grado. Estaba aprendiendo a leer y escribir. Cuando fue el conflicto armado, nos fuimos para la montaña durante 3 años. En la montaña aprendí a leer y escribir otro poco en maderas, o sea, no hay cuadernos, utilizamos tabla para escribir con carbón y piedras de color, y ahí empezamos a aprender a leer y escribir.
Romy's Foundations for Education is clearly providing many opportunities for Mayan youth through the scholarship program and the construction of school facilities, but her dedication to these communities goes beyond this mandate.
I was thinking of a way that hopefully would bring the people together, and so I decided to do a memorial so that anybody would be able to go there whenever they wanted, and also the students going to school there, which would of course not just be the kids from Xish. It would be kids that were all, their parents were all involved in the war before, and that would be a way of teaching the new generation about what did happen in the past.
Also in the works is a book about Mayan women in the communities of population and resistance.
During the time of the 36-year-old Civil War, the Army was in the Department of Quiché and did over 300 massacres in that one department alone. And they chased the people further up into the mountains. And as a matter of survival, these people formed and organized themselves and lived and survived for 14 years. A few of my students are actually from this specific group, and I decided to do a project with the women. And I sent up some samples of embroidery works, thinking that they would be able to do maybe I could sell them for them so they'd have some source of an income. A couple of months later, I got some embroidery works back, which had a lot of soldiers and helicopters and that. So they were very political, and I decided this would be a good project for a book.
Despite the decades of repression, the future may be starting to look better for the Mayan in Guatemala. In 1999, a Guatemalan Truth Commission blamed the army for 93% of the atrocities. President Clinton even acknowledged the role of the United States in the conflict and apologized for its support of the military leaders in the 1980s. More recently, Oscar Berger, who assumed office in January 2004, has proposed to reduce the military by about 1/3. He even offered a government position to Rigoberta Menchú, the Nobel laureate, and indigenous activist. Rios Montt has even lost his immunity from prosecution, and this may mean that the general is brought to justice. Despite these positive developments, there are still troubling signs in Guatemala. There is no real plan for land reform, which has been at the heart of the Mayan struggle since the beginning. Oscar Berger is certainly no populist. He hails from the traditional elite and supports neoliberal trade agreements and perks for big business. As well, the party of Rios Montt, the FRG, maintains significant representation in Congress, and the military is not likely to give up all its power so quickly. It is in this context that Romy Gonzales continues to forge ahead with her mission to educate the Mayan and hopefully prepare them for full participation in a Guatemalan society that truly respects and protects their culture and contribution to the country.
I feel a little bit more united with the people that have been involved in all this violence of the war, because I have had a loss. And it's and that's what's kept me going. And then with the hope of these children, and I love Guatemala. So working with the youth of tomorrow is my dream, and it's all coming through.